I knew my wedding day would carry its own challenges, but I wasn't prepared for the cruelty that surfaced. What would you do if someone tried to turn your love into a weakness and questioned your child's right to be part of the family? But when I spoke up, I protected what mattered most. Let me tell you what happened. They say weddings bring out the best in people, but I've always believed they reveal the truth. And sometimes, truth is a blade. Silent, sharp, and waiting. The first cut came during the rehearsal setup, disguised as a whisper. I was adjusting Jonah's bow tie. He kept fidgeting with it like it was a punishment, when I heard Elaine's voice echo down the church hallway, thick with that feigned sweetness I'd come to know too well. "Of course we don't really know who the father is," she said with a chuckle. "But Michael's always been such a generous soul." It took every ounce of restraint not to storm down that corridor. Instead, I froze, fingers still on Jonah's collar as he squirmed under my touch. He didn't hear her. Thank God he didn't hear. Elaine's audience? A flock of second cousins and one of Michael's great aunts who'd flown in from Arizona, all nodding along, pretending to be intrigued while clutching their little handbags of judgment. I stood there behind the folding chairs, hiding behind a column of flower arrangements. My chest burned. I wasn't new to the sting of her words. This woman had laced every interaction with poison since the day Michael introduced me. But this time, it wasn't just about me. It was about Jonah, my son, my little boy who'd picked petals off the rehearsal bouquets to make the tables look happier. The florist walked by, humming something light, completely unaware that I was seconds from crying or breaking something or both. I forced a smile and nodded, shifting the arrangements slightly. Busy hands, quiet mouth. That's how I'd survived in Michael's family so far. I turned and caught Michael's eye across the church. He was kneeling beside Jonah, showing him how to properly toss petals for the ceremony walk. His laugh rang out, light and warm. The sound that had first made me love him. That laugh had carried me through nights when Jonah was sick, when the bills piled up, when Elaine suggested in passing that Michael was too good for a woman with a child. He looked up at me then, smiling, giving me that wink that always meant, "I've got you." And in that moment, the whispering vanished, like fog in sunlight. Still, something shifted. Elaine had drawn her line in the sand, and she wasn't even pretending to be subtle anymore. Her words echoed inside me long after they'd faded from the corridor. Not for me, but for Jonah. Because he deserved a world where no one whispered about where he came from. Later, as we gathered for the final run-through, I felt the weight of every glance. Some were kind, some indifferent. But a few, the worst kind, lingered with curiosity that bordered on cruelty. And I knew. Tomorrow was supposed to be the beginning of something beautiful. But tonight was about surviving. Because the war had already started. And no one had bothered to tell the bride. Growing up, I knew how to make myself small. Not physically. Though I learned quickly how to fold into corners, blend into walls, disappear into quiet. No, I mean emotionally. I knew how to smile just enough, speak softly, and never ask for too much. It was the only way to survive in rooms where I didn't belong. Michael's family was one of those rooms. The first time I met them, Jonah was just 3 and still calling thunder, sky growls. I remember clutching his hand so tight at that first dinner, his little fingers sticky with applesauce, mine slick with nerves. The house was pristine. Crystal chandeliers, silverware so polished I saw my doubts reflected in them. Elaine greeted me at the door with a half hug and a full inspection. She didn't even try to hide it. Her eyes slid over my off-the-rack dress, my scuffed flats, and landed squarely on Jonah. "Oh," she'd said, her smile tightening. "A package deal." I laughed, awkward, unsure if she meant it as a joke. She didn't. Michael didn't notice, or he pretended not to. That night, he held my hand under the table, and I let myself believe that was enough. That love could be louder than judgment. That one day they'd see me the way he did. 7 years later, I'm still waiting. Even now, as I rehearse walking down the church aisle with Jonah tugging playfully at my skirt, I can feel it. The sense that I'm just visiting someone else's life, a supporting role in their perfect family production, the single mom they tolerate but don't quite welcome. "They're just formal," Michael would say when I mentioned the coldness. "They're not like your friends, babe. They're old school." Old school is one way to put it. Another would be exclusion wrapped in etiquette. I've heard Elaine introduce me at events as Michael's fiancé. Never. Jonah's mother. Never even Hannah. Like I'm a placeholder, a stepping stone toward a better chapter. Even now, she introduces Jonah with a laugh, as if he's some charming anecdote. He's such a character. You'd never know he wasn't one of ours. As if DNA were the price of entry. The thing is, I never expected a red carpet. I never asked for a seat at the head table. All I wanted was a little space, a little grace, a chance to show them that love, real love, doesn't care about bloodlines or pedigrees. But no matter how carefully I choose my dress, or how many thank you notes I write, I am still the girl standing outside the circle. Even now, as Jonah dances between pews with a petal basket and Michael grins like he's the luckiest man in the world, I can feel the invisible wall between me and the rest of them. They don't see the late nights, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories. They don't know the way Jonah curls against my chest when he's scared, or how he whispers, "I love you, Mommy," like it's a secret just for us. To them, he's just a complication. To me, he's the reason I learned to stand tall. And tomorrow, when I walk down that aisle, I won't just be walking toward Michael, I'll be walking for Jonah, for us. Even if I'm still outside the circle, I'll make damn sure the circle sees us. The light slanted through the church windows just right, golden and soft, like maybe even the sun had decided to behave for once. Jonah ran ahead of us, arms spread like airplane wings, his laugh echoing off the high ceiling. He was barefoot again. Of course. Michael just chuckled, shaking his head. We should have made shoes optional in the invite. I smiled, but the kind that barely touches your lips. My eyes were on Jonah. This little heartbeat of mine darting between pews like the world was his playground. I wanted him to feel this light forever. Michael stepped beside me, dropping into a crouch. He reached into the small duffel bag we brought with us, the one that always somehow had crayons, tissues, and half a crushed granola bar, and pulled out something unexpected. His old glove. It was worn, soft in the places that mattered, stitched with memory. He held it out toward Jonah like it was treasure. "Hey, buddy," he called. "Come here." Jonah bounded over, dropping to his knees in front of Michael. "What's that?" "This," Michael said, turning the glove over in his hands, "is what I caught my first fly ball with. I was about your size." Jonah's eyes lit up, that kind of wide-eyed awe only kids and people who still believe in magic can manage. "It's yours?" "It was," Michael said, then looked up at me. "But I think it's time it made some new memories." He handed it over slowly, like a sacred exchange. Jonah took it gently, reverently even, then promptly shoved it onto the wrong hand and made a fist. "I'm gonna catch everything," he declared. Michael laughed and stood up, brushing off his knees. He reached for my hand, threading his fingers through mine like he always does when he knows I'm holding back too much. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. This. Us. It's real now." He looked at Jonah, now pretending to pitch invisible balls to invisible batters down the aisle. "It's always been real." "No, I mean, they can't pretend anymore," I said. "Not after tomorrow. He's yours. I'm yours. There's no more in between." Michael turned to me, his face soft. "There never was." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about dresses and vows and matching name cards on reception tables. This was a line being drawn. And for once, I wasn't on the outside of it. I watched Jonah run with his glove, heard the sound of his laughter bounce off the stained glass, and I let myself imagine a future where he never had to wonder if he belonged. Tomorrow, I'd walk toward a man who chose both of us, who gave his childhood glove to a boy not born from him, but born for him. And maybe, just maybe, I'd stop asking for space and start claiming it. The florist was showing me how to pin the corsages when Elaine glided over, all pearls and practiced grace. She smiled at the florist. One of those thin, frosted smiles that never touched her eyes, then tilted her head toward me like she was about to share a secret. "Oh, Hannah," she said, loud enough for everyone within 10 feet to hear, "I've just been thinking about Jonah." I turned slowly. I knew that tone. It was the one she used when she was about to take something pure and drop it into the mud with a manicured hand. "He looks so much like Michael at that age, doesn't he?" she cooed, pausing just long enough for the florist to glance up, curious. Before I could respond, she added, "Of course, people always wonder. About the father, I mean. You never did say who he was he, around?" I blinked. the sting instant and hot. The florist froze mid-pin, suddenly unsure if she should continue or quietly die behind the bouquet. I didn't realize flower arrangements came with background checks, I said, forcing a smile. My voice stayed calm, but my pulse was thudding so loud I could barely hear my own words. Elaine gave a soft laugh like I was a child misunderstanding a joke. No, no, of course not, she said. I just think clarity is so important in families, don't you? Especially when children are involved. Her eyes flicked to the florist again. The audience mattered to her. Always. I felt my throat tighten, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a crack in my voice. Instead, I adjusted the bouquet in my hands and said quietly, Jonah has everything he needs, especially love. Oh, I'm sure he does, Elaine said, tone sugary. Michael's such a good man. Always helping people. That one landed. Because I knew what she was really saying. That Michael wasn't with me because he loved me, he was rescuing me, playing hero. And Jonah? A charity case in a bow tie. I wanted to scream, or cry, or both. But I didn't. I smiled instead, thanked the florist, and walked away like I hadn't just been gutted. I made it to the vestibule before I let my hands shake. Michael found me minutes later, still holding a sample boutonniere I'd forgotten to set down. He tilted his head, reading me without words. What happened? He asked, his voice soft. I wanted to tell him. Every cruel word, every moment I'd swallowed for the sake of his comfort, but I just looked up and said, she's just being Elaine. Michael stepped closer. His hand brushed my waist. She crosses a line, I'll shut it down, you know that, right? I nodded, but inside I was screaming. Because words like hers didn't just hurt. They lingered. They echoed. They rewrote the air around you. I looked back through the glass doors at Jonah, still tossing flower petals with another kid near the altar. He was laughing, unaware of the shadow his existence seemed to cast for some. And I made a silent vow. Let them whisper. Let them judge. Jonah would never know this version of the world. Not if I could help it. Vanessa's smile wasn't big. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was small, deliberate, and aimed directly at me from across the room. And somehow, that made it feel enormous. We'd never been close, not really. Michael's sister had always felt like an extension of Elaine, cut from the same elegant cloth, just softer around the edges. We shared a few polite conversations at holidays, the occasional email about seating charts or dress fittings. But warmth? That was new. I saw it when Elaine made her little scene by the florist. Vanessa had been near the welcome table, arranging the place cards with surgical precision, but her head turned at just the right moment. She heard enough. Her expression didn't change much, but her hand paused on a card, and then that glance found mine. That's when she smiled, quietly, on purpose. She saw me. Later, as we reviewed the rehearsal schedule, she approached. No preamble, no fake cheer, just Vanessa, straight-backed and direct. She stood beside me like she belonged there, like I belonged there too. I moved Jonah's name card, she said casually. He's next to Michael at dinner. I blinked. Oh, thank you. I didn't know. Elaine had him at the far end of the table, she added, a little too flatly. By the server's station. That twisted something in my chest. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. I appreciate that, I said, my voice low. Vanessa just nodded. He deserves to be seen. For a second, I didn't know what to say. It was such a simple sentence, but it hit like thunder. Jonah deserves to be seen, not tolerated, not reshuffled to the margins. Seen. I'm sorry if it feels like we've all been. She started, then stopped herself. I see what's happening. I swallowed, feeling a sudden weight behind my eyes. I wasn't going to cry. Not here, not now. But I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone in that room to notice. Not out of pity, out of fairness. Thank you, I managed. Vanessa looked down at the clipboard in her hand, then at Jonah, who was now dragging Michael toward the guestbook table to sign it with stickers. Her expression softened just a little. He's got good instincts, she said. Takes after you. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just smiled. Not the kind you give when someone's watching. The real kind. The rare kind. For the rest of the afternoon, Vanessa hovered nearby, not intrusive, not obvious, but present. And in a room full of practiced grace and subtle cruelty, her quiet loyalty felt like a life raft. It was the first time since walking into that church that I didn't feel completely alone. The bathroom smelled like peonies and citrus-scented hand soap, but none of it masked the sound of whispered cruelty echoing off the tiled walls. I hadn't meant to linger. I just needed a moment, a breath, a pause, a space where I didn't have to keep adjusting my face into something polite. But as I reached for a paper towel, their voices slipped in through the cracked door to the bridal suite. "I mean, it's sweet, I guess," one of them said. "But does anyone really believe Michael's in it for the long haul?" My body froze, my hand still on the faucet. "Elaine said he's just trying to be a good guy," another added. "He took them in." "That's not the same as family." A pause, a laugh that wasn't kind. "And that poor kid. What happens when Michael wakes up and realizes this isn't the life he wanted?" My mouth went dry. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they said it. Like they knew something I didn't. Like they were betting on my expiration date. I stood there, the water running cold against my fingers, heartbeat pulsing in my ears. I could have barged out, confronted them, demanded names. But what was the point? They weren't talking to me. They were talking about me. And that difference gutted me. I turned off the tap and stepped back, quiet as breath. I waited until I heard the shuffle of heels, the soft giggle fading as they walked away. When I finally emerged, the hallway felt too bright, the laughter down the corridor too loud, too sharp. Everyone looked the same, friendly, familiar. But now I couldn't tell who had said it. Or worse, who had agreed. I wandered back behind the altar where the extra centerpieces were stacked in plastic tubs. No one followed, no one noticed. I sat on the floor, pressed my back against the cold stone, and wrapped my arms around my knees. This wasn't about forgetting the cake flavors or which cousin needed gluten-free. This was about being tolerated until the ink dried, and maybe not even then. Jonah deserved better. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I could give it to him. Not here. Not in this world that smiled at his dimples and questioned his right to be here behind closed doors. I buried my face in my hands and tried to breathe. Just breathe. But the hurt clung tight. And the silence? It felt exactly like exile. I didn't cry. But I came so close it scared me. I was watching the sky shift through the chapel windows, that strange in-between color that lives right before sunset, when Michael found me. I didn't hear him come in. He never made a big entrance, he wasn't built like that. Just a quiet kind of presence, the kind that wrapped around you instead of announcing itself. He didn't say anything right away, just settled beside me on the bench, thigh to thigh, hand resting near mine but not touching yet. "You've been gone a while," he said gently. I nodded, staring straight ahead. I needed air. He waited. He always waited. I wanted to lie. To say I was fine, that everything was perfect, that it was just nerves. But my mouth didn't want to play along tonight. "There were voices," I said, "in the bridal suite. Bridesmaids. Laughing. Saying this isn't real. That you just playing hero." Michael's body stilled, not tensed, not yet, just stilled. "They said Jonah isn't really family," I added, quieter now. Like whispering it would shrink the wound. He turned to look at me, and that's when I saw it. The shift. His eyes darkened, jaw tightened. Anger, but the quiet kind. The kind that meant something might break soon, and it wouldn't be me. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice cracked in that way it only did when he meant every word. "I should have shut this down sooner." I shook my head. "You can't control what people think, but I can damn well control who gets to say it around you." That did something to me. Loosened a knot I didn't know I'd tied. He reached for my hand then, threaded his fingers through mine with a grip that was more promise than comfort. "You're mine," he said simply. "And Jonah's mine too." My throat tightened so fast I almost couldn't breathe. "We're not temporary," he continued. "We're not a favor or a phase or something I'll wake up from. We're a family, Hannah." I knew it the second Jonah ran up to me with that toy dinosaur and told me I looked like someone who needed a snack. I laughed, sudden and soft. He was 3, he thought everyone needed snacks. Michael smiled, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. "I need you," he said, "both of you." Silence stretched between us, thick with the kind of love that doesn't need music or candles or witnesses. Just two people, sitting on a bench, saying things that matter. Finally, I leaned into him. Just enough to let his shoulder hold me up. "I believe you," I whispered, "even when they don't." Michael kissed the side of my head, and we sat like that, still and strong, while the chapel lights flickered on behind us. Maybe we couldn't make everyone love us. But this was enough. The rehearsal dinner was held in the garden room of a country club Elaine had insisted on. All white tablecloths and strategic lighting, as if ambiance could erase the months of tension. I wore the navy dress Vanessa had helped me pick. Not too bright, not too plain. Just enough to feel like armor. Jonah was at the kids' table, halfway through his third roll, already bored with the paper placemat games. Michael sat beside me, relaxed but alert, the kind of posture he adopted when he knew the room might turn on a dime. Elaine was across from us, wineglass in hand, smile too polished. When she stood to give her toast, the sound of silverware clinking against crystal filled the room. Michael stiffened. I knew the script already: praise, polish, poison. I just want to say, she began, voice smooth as syrup, how proud I am of my son Michael. He's always been thoughtful, loyal. The kind of man who makes sacrifices without needing applause. A few guests murmured in agreement. Michael's jaw flexed. And now, to see him starting this next chapter with such generosity. Her eyes flicked to me. Taking on new responsibilities, embracing change so selflessly. There it was. The knife slid in without so much as a ripple. Not everyone could do what he's doing. Not everyone would be strong enough to love so openly. She smiled, as if that was kindness. But Michael, you've always had a big heart. Just like your father. Guests chuckled softly, the sound polite and clueless. I didn't move. Didn't blink. My fingers curled around the stem of my glass. Across the table, Vanessa looked like she'd just bitten into something sour. Michael reached for my hand under the table. Gripped it tight. To new beginnings, Elaine finished, raising her glass. To new beginnings, the room echoed. I swallowed my champagne, let it burn all the way down. Afterward, people drifted into conversation clusters. Jonah had curled up in Vanessa's lap, playing with the corner of her scarf. Michael excused himself to talk to the caterer. Elaine passed by me on her way to the dessert table. She didn't stop, just smiled and said, "Such a lovely evening, isn't it?" I looked at her, really looked. And I saw it. Not elegance, not control, fear. Fear wrapped in pearls and mascara. "Yes," I said quietly, "it's the beginning of something." She didn't respond, just walked on, the click of her heels sharp against the tile. Behind me, I heard Jonah's laugh. Wild and real and completely unaware. And I knew that no toast, no dig, no polished performance could unmake what we had. They could call it generosity. I called it love. That night, after the plates were cleared and Jonah was fast asleep in the hotel bed, I sat by the window with a cup of tea I didn't really want and a heart that felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. The city lights blinked back at me, soft and distant, and my reflection in the glass looked like someone I only half recognized. Tired, yes, but something else. Braver, maybe. Or maybe just exhausted enough to finally stop pretending. The room was quiet except for the sound of Jonah's soft breathing behind me. I watched him earlier. At the dinner, climbing into Vanessa's lap, completely unaware of the tension swirling around him. Safe. Loved. And for a few moments, that had felt like enough. But now, in the quiet, the truth came creeping back in. My truth. The truth I'd kept locked behind a polite smile, a carefully controlled tone, 1,000 tiny deflections. Jonah's father was no mystery to me. There wasn't some dramatic story, no scandal buried in the past. There was just a night. One night. It was in the worst stretch of my life, postpartum fog that felt like drowning with a smile. Jonah was only a few months old. I was barely sleeping, barely functioning. My friends had drifted, my family wasn't close, and every day felt like walking through syrup with weights strapped to my chest. I went out that night. To breathe. Just breathe. A friend had invited me to a quiet bar and I said yes because I needed to remember I was still human, that I could still laugh, that I still existed outside of bottles and night feeds and crying that didn't stop. I met a man there. He was kind, attentive, not in a slick way, just easy, present. I didn't even give him my last name. We talked for hours, about music, about books, about how terrifying it is to feel invisible in your own life. He didn't ask about my baby. I didn't tell him. We ended up back at his place. It was soft, and it was sad, and it was desperate, not in the way the world uses that word, but in the way it feels when you've forgotten what it's like to be held. I left before sunrise. He never called. I never gave him away too. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks later. There was no heartbreak, no betrayal, just silence. Mine. And survival. I raised Jonah alone for years before Michael came into our lives, and by the time I could tell the truth, no one asked. They assumed. They judged. They whispered. But here's the truth. No one wants to admit, not every child born from pain is a mistake. Jonah was the light in a tunnel I didn't think I'd ever crawl out of. He saved me. And maybe it wasn't the story they wanted to hear. But it was ours. Vanessa found her voice the same way I had found mine. Not in a scream, but in a silence that had finally had enough. I didn't see it happen. I heard it first. The sharp pause in conversation. The hush that falls when something real pierces the careful surface of a social gathering. I had stepped out for a moment, standing just beyond the reach of the string lights, trying to breathe in the cooler night air without tasting the bitter aftertaste of Elaine's toast. My shoes pinched, my ribs ached from smiling. And still, I stayed. Because Jonah was asleep upstairs and Michael had whispered we were almost through it. But then I heard Vanessa's voice. And it wasn't soft anymore. No, Elaine. You don't get to keep doing this. I turned. Vanessa stood in the center of the garden room, wine glass in one hand, the other clenched at her side. Elaine blinked at her, caught mid-sentence. A few guests turned, frozen with half-sipped drinks and startled eyes. You think no one notices, Vanessa said. That we're all just supposed to laugh politely and move on. But you've humiliated her enough. Elaine opened her mouth, probably to play innocent, or wounded, or both, but Vanessa didn't give her the space. She is raising Jonah with more love than I'd seen in this family in years, she said, louder now. And you? You undermine her in front of florists, bridesmaids, caterers, anyone who'll listen. The silence rippled. People shifted in their seats. Some avoided eye contact, others leaned forward, caught in the unfolding. She makes this family better, Vanessa said, voice steady now. Stronger. And you can't stand it because she didn't come from the same country club bloodline you like to flaunt. Elaine's face had gone pale, her smile frozen. And you know what? Vanessa turned slightly, her eyes finding mine across the patio. We see her. And we see Jonah. And they belong here. I couldn't move. I wasn't sure I was breathing. For so long, I'd been the only one carrying it. The only one shielding Jonah from whispers, shielding Michael from choosing between loyalty and truth. But now, Vanessa had thrown the doors open. Elaine swallowed. Vanessa, you're upset. No, Vanessa said, calm now. I'm finally honest. And just like that, something cracked, not just between them. Something in the air. In the family. Elaine turned away, retreating to the shadows, her influence shrinking as heads turned toward me instead. Not out of pity, but recognition. Michael asked me to meet him in the courtyard behind the chapel, just him and Jonah, no one else. I thought maybe he needed air too, a moment to reset after Vanessa's explosion, but when I stepped outside, it was quiet. Jonah was sitting on the edge of the stone fountain, feet swinging, tie crooked like always. Michael was crouched in front of him, holding something small in both hands. I almost turned back, thinking I was intruding on a father-son moment I didn't want to interrupt. But then Michael looked up, and there was something in his eyes, something wide and raw. Come here, he said softly. I walked slowly, heart tapping against my ribs like it knew this moment was bigger than I could understand yet. Jonah grinned when he saw me. We're practicing. Practicing what? I asked, brushing his hair back. Michael stood then, taking my hand, placing something in it. A folded piece of paper. Worn at the creases. I wrote something extra, he said, for tomorrow. I wanted to ask him first. I looked at him, then at Jonah, who beamed like the sun was inside him. He said yes. Michael cleared his throat, rubbing the back of his neck in that nervous way he did when the words mattered more than he was ready for. I want to say his name during the vows, he said. Not just to you, but to him. I want him to hear it. From me, in front of everyone. My knees nearly gave out. I blinked fast, pressing my lips together, holding back something sharp and beautiful rising in my chest. He said I could, Michael added, his voice rough now. But I needed to hear it from you too. Jonah looked up at me. I told Daddy he could, 'cause he already does all the dad stuff. Michael let out a breath, smiling. He really does simplify things. I knelt in front of Jonah, hands cupping his cheeks. Is that what you want? Sweetheart? He nodded. If you're there and he's there, then I'm good. Simple, solid, unshakable. I looked at Michael. My Michael. You can say his name, I whispered. Say it loud, let them all hear it. He pulled me into him then, arms wrapping tight around both of us. And right there, in the quiet garden behind the chapel, a new vow was born. Not with rings or altar steps, but with a boy in a crooked tie, a man holding his heart out, and a woman who finally felt like home. It happened so fast, I barely had time to react. Elaine was holding court again near the dessert station. Same crowd, different poison. But this time, Vanessa was standing closer. Too close. I could see it in her eyes before I heard the words. Something inside her had been waiting years for this crack to appear. Oh, she's lucky, Elaine was saying, stirring cream into her coffee like it offended her. Michael could have done so much better. But he's always been soft-hearted. That's the problem. They take advantage of men like that. Someone chuckled nervously. A shrug, a nod. And then Vanessa stepped forward. No, she said, loud enough to slice through the air. The problem is you, Elaine. Elaine blinked. Actually blinked. Like she couldn't compute the audacity. Vanessa didn't flinch. You've made a sport out of tearing people down, you dress it up in pearls and brunch etiquette, but it's cruelty. And I'm done pretending it's anything else. The crowd stilled. A few people set their forks down. One of the cousins looked like she might bolt. Elaine narrowed her eyes. Excuse me? No, Vanessa said again, firmer this time. You don't get to make someone feel small just because you're afraid of them taking up space you think you own. I stood at the edge of the room, stunned, frozen. 1,000 things I'd wanted to say over the years, all of them being spoken now by someone I never expected to speak them for me. You've humiliated her long enough, Vanessa continued. And we've all let you. We've laughed. We've looked away. But not anymore. She turned then. To me. Hannah, she said, and her voice was steady, clear, proud. You make this family better. Stronger. You're not an outsider. You're the only person in this room who's never worn a mask. Tears stung my eyes before I could stop them. People started whispering. Some in agreement, some in shock. But none of them rushed to Elaine's defense. And Elaine? She just stood there, blinking slowly, mouth parting like she might say something. But nothing came. Her silence was the loudest sound in the room. Michael came to my side then, one arm sliding around my waist. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have to. Vanessa walked away from the table, head high, wine glass still in hand like it was a trophy she'd earned. The murmur grew louder, shifting, realigning. I felt the tide turn. Not because they suddenly loved me, but because someone finally told the truth. And once truth is out, it doesn't go back in. Elaine turned slowly, scanning the room, and found nothing waiting for her but distance. The bridal suite was too quiet. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, breath shallow, the applause from the garden still echoing in my chest like a memory I wasn't sure belonged to me. I should have felt triumphant, seen, defended, held up by someone who didn't owe me a damn thing but stood anyway. But instead, I felt like I was breaking apart. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, clutching the edge of the vanity table like it could hold me up. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger. Dress perfect, makeup flawless, expression empty. Too many years holding it in. Too many rooms like that one. I sank onto the edge of the chaise lounge, hands shaking in my lap, and the tears came quietly. Not dramatic, just steady. They ran down my face like they'd been waiting for permission. Like my body had been storing them all this time for this exact moment. Because now that it was over, the hiding, the pretending, the bracing for the next jab, all that was left was the ache. I didn't hear the door open. Didn't hear the footsteps padding across the carpet. Mommy? Jonah's voice cut through everything. I looked up and there he was, in his little white shirt and vest, the bow tie already undone, hair a mess from napping on the couch downstairs. He blinked at me, confused but calm, like he'd expected to find me and was just waiting to be let in. You look like a princess, he said, climbing up onto the chaise next to me without hesitation. I smiled, watery and crooked. Do I? He nodded. But you're crying. I pulled him into my arms, tucked his head under my chin. Sometimes even princesses cry, baby. He was quiet for a second, then asked, Is it because of that mean lady? I froze. He pulled back just enough to look at me, Vanessa said that lady doesn't get to be mean anymore. Is that true? I couldn't help it. I laughed through the tears. Yeah, it's true. Good, he said, curling into my side like a cat. Then you don't gotta cry. I kissed the top of his head. I'm crying because people finally saw us. He nodded again, like it made perfect sense. 'Cause we're awesome. And just like that, the ache softened. I held my son in a room that had once felt like a cage, and now, with him in it, felt like freedom. The voices were still out there. The judgment. The stares. But in here, in this small, golden pocket of quiet, all I felt was enough. Michael didn't knock. He never did when it mattered. He stepped into the bridal suite like a storm held tightly in human skin, quiet, focused, and carrying something that couldn't wait. Jonah was still curled against me, but he sat up when he saw Michael's face. Even he could feel it. Something had shifted. I need 10 minutes, Michael said gently, nodding toward Jonah. I kissed Jonah's cheek. Why don't you go find Vanessa? I bet she has mints in her purse. He hopped down without question, trusting the grown-ups to figure things out like he always did. The door clicked shut behind him. Michael turned to me then, and I saw it. Not anger. Not sadness. Resolve. I'm calling everyone in, he said, before the ceremony. I blinked. What? I'm not walking down that aisle pretending everything's fine, he said. Not after what they've said. Not after what they've done to you. To Jonah. To us. He crossed the room, hands shaking slightly as he took mine. I'm gathering the whole family. Every cousin, every aunt, even my damn uncles who never remember your name. And I'm telling them. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. If they can't treat you and Jonah with the respect you deserve, he said, voice low and full, they don't need to be there. Michael? No. I should have done this years ago. He stepped closer. I let them think silence was strength. That letting it go was peacekeeping. But it wasn't. It was cowardice. His voice caught just for a second. You are my home, he said. And Jonah is my son. And if anyone still needs convincing of that, they can watch the ceremony from the parking lot. A tear slid down my cheek before I realized it was coming. He wiped it away with his thumb. I'm not letting you walk into a room where you still have to wonder if you're welcome. Not today. I nodded slowly, the weight of every buried feeling bubbling up in my chest. What are you going to say? Michael exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath for years. The truth. That I choose you. That I choose him. That anyone who has a problem with that doesn't belong in our future. Outside the window, I could hear movement. Chairs being straightened, music testing on the speakers. The ceremony was minutes away. And still, he stood there, calm in his fury, steady in his love. I love you, I whispered. He pulled me into his arms, holding me like something sacred. I know, he said. That's why this time, they're going to hear it too. The music started just as the sky softened. That pre-evening hush when everything feels suspended, like the world's holding its breath. I stood at the edge of the path with Jonah beside me, his small hand wrapped tight in mine. He wore the boutonniere Vanessa had pinned to his lapel, slightly crooked, but proudly displayed like a badge of honor. He looked up at me and smiled, wide and sure. No nerves. Just joy. Behind us, the crowd rustled, a sea of relatives and friends turning in their seats. Ahead of us, Michael stood under the archway of eucalyptus and wildflowers, his eyes locked on mine. I could still feel the echoes of his words in my bones, the ones he said to his family just minutes before. If you can't see Hannah as mine, truly, fully mine, then you're not needed at this ceremony. And if you can't treat Jonah as my son, I suggest you leave now. Some did. Quietly. A few uncles, one of Elaine's friends, and, of course, Elaine herself. She stood, whispered something sharp into her napkin, and slipped out before the music began. But most stayed, silent, watching. And now, here I was, walking that path, Jonah's tiny shoes tapping beside my heels, every eye suddenly warmer than I expected. Not glowing, not perfect, but softer, changed. I didn't look around much, I didn't need to. Because every step forward I felt Jonah's grip tighten. Every petal beneath my feet felt like something cracking open inside me. And every inch closer to Michael, the whispers from the past began to fade. The aisle wasn't long, but it felt like a lifetime. When we reached him, Michael knelt. Not to me, to Jonah. Ready? He asked. Jonah nodded like he was being handed the keys to the world. Michael stood, then looked at me, eyes full, hands steady, and offered his arm. I took it. And together, all three of us turned toward the future. Michael's voice shook, just once, and then steadied like a hand finding purchase. We stood beneath the arch, wind teasing the petals, the crowd still and breathless. My hands were in his, Jonah off to the side with Vanessa, clutching a small velvet pouch he refused to let go of. The officiant had just finished the traditional vows, and now it was Michael's turn. He looked at me, but his first words weren't to me. He turned to Jonah. "Before I say anything else," he said, voice carrying through the garden like a secret shared with everyone, "I need to ask permission." The guests leaned in, confused, curious. Michael cleared his throat. "Jonah, can I include you in my vows today?" Jonah blinked, then nodded so hard his bow tie bounced. A few chuckles broke the tension, and then silence again. Michael looked back at me, eyes glassy now. "Hannah," he began, "I fell in love with you the moment I saw how fiercely you loved him. Not in a quiet, gentle way, but in a way that roared. You taught me that family isn't inherited, it's chosen, fought for, protected." I gripped his hands tighter, my heart climbing into my throat. "I vow to stand beside you. Not just when it's easy, but when it's complicated, messy, and unfair. I vow to protect the world you built when no one else helped you build it." He turned again, this time fully to Jonah. And the world held its breath. "And Jonah," he said, voice cracking again, "I promise to raise you, to love you, to always have your back. You are my son in every way that counts, and I am so lucky you found me." A gasp rippled through the crowd, short, sharp, and then came the applause. Loud, unapologetic. Some guests were already crying. Even the officiant wiped her eye before continuing. I didn't look at the crowd. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I knew. The whisperers couldn't touch us now. Michael had spoken our truth into the open. And it was louder than any secret ever whispered behind closed doors. Elaine sat in the third row, dressed in pale gray with lips pressed into a line so sharp it could have drawn blood. Her hands clutched the program so tightly I thought the paper might tear. She didn't applaud. Not during Michael's vows, not during Jonah's gasp of joy, not even when half the guests stood, clapping as if the moment deserved a standing ovation. She just sat there. Frozen. I saw her. Not because I was looking for her. I wasn't. But you always feel the coldest part of the room, even when the rest is filled with light. Michael didn't glance her way. Jonah didn't notice her at all. But I did. And for the first time, I didn't care. Let her watch. Let her sit there and feel the weight of everything she tried to control slipping through her fingers like rice at the end of a wedding ceremony. Scattered, joyful, unstoppable. She had no power here anymore. The applause faded, replaced by soft sniffles, the creak of guests shifting back into their seats, and the gentle rustle of flowers in the breeze. The officiant gave us a beat before continuing, like even she knew some moments deserved to stretch just a little longer. But Elaine didn't move. Not a word. Not a smile. Not a flicker of acknowledgement. She wasn't the center anymore. And that silence? That was her defeat. Because no one turned to her for permission. No one whispered back in her defense. And when the vows were done, when Michael kissed me with his hands tangled in mine and Jonah cheered like he'd just won a trophy, Elaine stayed seated. Small. Still. Bitter. A statue in a garden full of life. And I let her fade. It happened so fast, like joy couldn't wait its turn. The officiant had barely finished her final sentence. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," when Jonah took off running. He bolted down the steps of the altar like he'd been waiting the entire ceremony for a green light. His little shoes thudded against the wooden platform, boutonniere bouncing on his chest. Michael didn't have time to react. One moment he was still holding my hand, and the next he was being tackled by a laughing, flying child with more emotion than coordination. "Daddy!" Jonah shouted, arms thrown around Michael's neck, feet lifting off the ground. And just like that, everything broke open. The crowd gasped. Not in horror, but in something brighter. Something that bloomed. A wave of it rushed through the seats, mouths dropping, hands clasping, a few guests reaching for tissues they hadn't expected to need. Michael caught Jonah mid-leap, spinning slightly with the force of it. They both laughed. The deep kind, the kind that lives in your chest for hours after. Michael's arms wrapped around Jonah like instinct, like muscle memory, like love. "Hey, little man," he said softly, forehead pressed to Jonah's. "You trying to steal the show?" Jonah grinned. "We're a team now, right?" Michael looked up at me then, still holding Jonah like he'd always belonged there. "Yeah, buddy. We're a team." And in that moment, with the sun lighting up the altar behind us, the arch still swaying with leftover vows, and the crowd now fully undone, it wasn't just a wedding. It was a family being born. I walked to them, dress sweeping the petals, heart too full to hold still. Michael reached for me. Jonas squished between us, and we stood there, the three of us, tangled in each other, laughing in disbelief that it was finally real. The applause returned then, louder this time. Not polite, not ceremonial. Real. Raw. Earned. And somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "That boy just made it official." They were right. He did. The music pulsed under strings of fairy lights, soft and golden, casting shadows that danced across white tablecloths and wine glasses half full. Guests swirled around us, laughing, eating, toasting with the kind of abandon that only comes when something good has already happened, and now all that's left is to celebrate it. I hadn't taken my shoes off yet, but I was close. Michael spun Jonah around the dance floor, both of them wild with giggles, the hem of Jonah's shirt already untucked, bow tie long gone. He was pink-cheeked and flying. Vanessa had joined them, one arm twirling in the air, the other holding a champagne glass she somehow hadn't spilled. She winked at me across the dance floor like we shared an inside joke now, one that didn't need explaining. I stood back for a moment, just watching. Because there was nothing to fix, no tension to manage, no whispers chasing at my heels. For the first time, I wasn't surviving the moment. I was in it. Jonah jumped into Michael's arms again, and this time Michael dipped him backward dramatically, earning applause from a few tables nearby. Jonah screamed with laughter. I looked across the room, half out of habit, and found Elaine. She was at the farthest table, nursing a drink that hadn't been touched in 20 minutes. Alone. The chairs around her empty, the tablecloth askew. She didn't look angry. She looked like the last person still holding onto a rulebook. No one was playing by anymore. And for once, I didn't feel sorry. I turned away from her and stepped onto the dance floor, catching Jonah as he whirled past. He crashed into me, all limbs and joy. "Mommy, we're dancing forever," he declared, arms stretched wide. I laughed. "Forever, huh? That's a long time." He nodded seriously. "That's how long we get to be a team." Michael slid behind me, wrapping his arms around both of us, his voice low and warm against my ear. "Forever sounds pretty good." And under those lights, surrounded by people who had finally seen us, finally accepted us, we danced. Not to prove anything, just because we could. Later, when most of the guests had gone and the music faded into a low hum, Jonah ran across the grass barefoot, his dress shoes long forgotten near the dessert table. He held the glove, Michael's old one, high above his head, waving it like a trophy. A sparkler trailed in his other hand, its fizz and flicker lighting his face like firelight from a dream. The stars had finally claimed the sky, quiet and endless, and he laughed like he owned them. Michael and I stood a few feet away, arms around each other, watching our sun streak across the lawn like joy itself. "You ever think it would look like this?" I asked softly, resting my head against his shoulder. Michael shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. "No. I thought it'd be quieter, smaller. But this is better." The sparkler dimmed in Jonah's hand, its last bit of light fading into the night. He didn't notice. He tossed the glove high into the air, caught it, barely, and yelled, "I got it!" I laughed, loud and real, the kind that didn't ask for permission. Michael kissed the top of my head. "He's ours," he said. He didn't mean just biologically, he meant fully, completely. No question marks, no explanations, just ours. Jonah ran back to us then, panting, cheeks flushed, sparkler now just a burnt stick. "I think the stars are watching us," he said, collapsing against my legs. I knelt, brushing his hair back. "Maybe they are." He leaned into me, glove tucked under one arm, voice sleepy. "Do you think they know this was the best day ever?" I looked at Michael. At the sky. At everything we'd fought to build. "I think they do," I whispered. And under that velvet sky, With sparkler smoke still clinging to the air and the scent of late summer grass rising around us, our story, the real one, finally began.